Our top story is a BBC exclusive. It takes us back to a conflict which took place in 2009 in Sri Lanka. The final months of the civil war there, which resulted in the end of the Tamil Tiger insurgency and left tens of thousands of civilians dead. According to a draft of a highly critical internal United Nations report seen by the BBC, the UN failed in its mandate to protect civilians in the last months of the bloody civil war. Well, we're joined on the line now by the Sri Lankan MP Rajiva Wijesinha, who was the head of the government secretariat for coordinating the peace process at the end of the civil war. Sir, I'm assuming that you have heard part of this report. Can I just start by asking you why the government of Sri Lanka wanted the United Nations to go? Was it because you couldn't protect them, or did you have another reason?
Well, in fact, we didn't want them to go. I mean, I've said this again and again, but obviously no one's checked. In September, we asked the NGOs to leave because one of them had actually been supplying vehicles to the Tigers. We specifically asked, and that letter is available, UNFPA and UNHRC, the High Commission for Refugees, HCR, to stay along with the Red Cross. I'm afraid the then UNDP rep was galvanized by some people who wanted almost to blackmail us to say, no, if we can't all stay, then we're going to leave. So the Secretary of Defense said then, leave. But the ICRC stayed right through, and we have got all the details of the ICRC interventions during that period.
Well, we're not talking about the ICRC, sir. If you wouldn't mind.
Let me finish. The UN was there right through January. And it's nonsense to say the UNDP rep didn't bother. They were very concerned. I remember my minister being rung up by one morning and told that the people in the no-fire zone were being fired on. But in the evening, they actually sent us an SMS saying information most of the firing came from the Tigers. I don't think they were lying. But unfortunately, some junior members of the UN have complained about their bosses and lied about them.
Sir, this internal report at the UN says that under intense pressure from the Sri Lankan government, the United Nations did not make clear that a large majority of deaths were caused by government shelling. And that you put the United Nations under that pressure.
The panel's inquiries have not been transparent. We have got the lines from the UN right through. The UN dealt with us, and I think this is an attempt also to undermine senior members of the UN. I'm sorry you can't share the leaked report with me, but recently I saw something by a Britisher called Julian Beagle, which quoted young people in the UN. They are liars. For instance, I checked with IOM about the person called Suzanne. They said there was no such person called Suzanne. There's something called Internews, which said that there was what the views still represent them. I'm afraid these people are not only determined to push a political agenda, but they are not truthful. I mean, I don't mind people being anonymous, but don't claim to have a name which turns out to be false. Why don't you check with the senior leadership of the UN? I have to say that the Sri Lankan government has failed because when that Darusman report came out, I personally checked. Sir John Holmes had not been contacted except very briefly initially. Neil Boona, who was the UNDP head and worked very well with the Sri Lankans, was not contacted. He can testify that the Tigers did not allow something like 600 Sri Lankan workers to leave. But at the end of the war, all of them were safe. So these are hardly indiscriminate attacks.
Well, let me ask you about the issue that both sides in this conflict have been accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. What do you, as a representative of the Sri Lankan government, have to say about that? That there was widespread, indiscriminate shelling of civilians?
Well, who are the people who make these attacks? For instance, in the East, where I followed very carefully, Human Rights Watch did indiscriminate attacks on civilians, but their report recorded only one instance of civilians being killed, and that was because of motor locating radar. The army took full responsibility and said, we are sorry, but we used motor locating radar. And Human Rights Watch granted the Tigers had been with weapons in a refugee camp, but they said they were not heavy weapons. How dare they allow these people to shoot from amongst refugees?
Do you not, sir, take responsibility?
I was head of the Peace Secretariat. I monitored Channelnet every day, and I would ask for explanations.
How do you account for, sir? How do you account for tens?
You need finish.
You are not answering the question, sir.
In only 29 of them were there even allegations of civilian deaths.
How do you account for tens of thousands of civilians being killed? How do you account for tens of thousands of people being killed?
Not tens of thousands, because even the UN report, which the UN then said we cannot talk about because it's not verifiable. So John Holmes had said that. He was accused of suppressing it, but he was trying to be It's obviously it's exaggerated. There are times that the people who started this figure, 20,000, they first said it was on the basis of extrapolations. When I pointed out that was not true, they said it was on the basis of graveyards. The graveyards were looked at aerially by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and their report was suppressed because they said the graveyards barely expanded during those days. So why don't you look at a few facts instead of listening to the exaggerations of people who simply cannot cite dates and times?
Is it not also the case, sir, that you have not allowed journalists to report on this story freely, which makes it very difficult to verify some of the things that you're claiming?
It would be ridiculous. During the war, I was head of the Peace Secretariat. I kept asking journalists to come in. The Indians came in and reported very fairly. And I must say, in fairness to the BBC, it was not outrageous. The BBC tended to cite people, but they always said they were citing. It was only Channel 4, and I'm really sorry to say this, The Guardian, that came out with such outrageous lies. And when I questioned the Guardian guy, he sort of said to me, I now realize that source was not reliable. Because the source that told him there were 13 women with their throats cut. There was not one. I checked with all the protection agencies.
Okay, sir. We have run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sri Lankan MP Rajiva Wijesinha.